You ever have that moment where you realize you're being watched? Really watched. Not the casual glance of a neighbor across the fence. Not the security cameras that come with suburban life, but something more invasive. Something that made the hair on your neck prickle like static. That was the day my backyard stopped feeling like mine. It was a Saturday morning in late spring. I had just fired up the grill, my dog Duke was chasing his tail in the patchy grass, and my wife Linda was humming while trimming the rose bushes. After decades of working my bones down as a construction foreman, we had finally bought this modest home in Oak Haven Estates, a tidy little neighborhood with shiny mailboxes, neat lawns only, signs, and a dreaded homeowners association that came with more rules than the Army ever threw at me. Still, it was our dream. At least, it was supposed to be. The first buzz came faint and high, like a mosquito that never landed. I thought nothing of it until Duke barked. Low and nervous, tail stiff. That's when I looked up and saw it. A black drone hovering 20 feet above my fence line, tiny camera eye glinting in the sun. "What the?" I muttered, shading my face. The drone tilted, steadied itself, and lingered over my yard. Not just a flyover, a full stop, watching, recording. Linda froze, pruning shears in hand. "Tom, is that thing filming us?" It was. I knew it in my gut. I threw a rag over the grill and marched toward the back gate, waving my arms, yelling, "Get that thing out of here!" It didn't move. It hovered, like it had every right to be there, like we were trespassing in our own yard. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, it zipped upward and vanished beyond the rooftops. My pulse was hammering. Linda was pale. "Who would even do that?" she whispered. I had a sinking suspicion. And it wore pearls, a permanent scowl, and had introduced herself at our very first HOA meeting as the protector of Oak Haven standards. Her real name was Margaret, but everyone in the neighborhood called her Karen behind her back. She had the soul of a drill sergeant and the charm of a wet sock. President of the HOA board for 10 straight years, she treated the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. But drones? That was a new low. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it wasn't her. Maybe it was some kid messing around. But when a letter showed up in our mailbox that Monday, stamped with the HOA's crest, I knew better. Violation notice. It read in bold red letters. The accusation? Improper backyard maintenance evidence documented. Linda looked at me with wide eyes. Evidence? They're using that drone to spy on us? My hands shook as I held the paper. That backyard was my sanctuary, my place to breathe after years of grinding work, and now it felt like a prison yard with a watchtower above. I wanted to storm over to Karen's prim White House, ring her doorbell until her plastic flamingos trembled, and demand answers. But that's exactly what she thrived, on conflict, outbursts, any excuse to paint you as unstable in front of the board. So I swallowed my anger, for the moment. But inside, a fire was lit. Who gave her the right to spy on me? To film my wife pruning roses? To make us feel like trespassers in our own home? The answer was clear. Nobody. And that's when I decided if she wanted to make this personal, then so would I. I didn't know it yet, but the battle that began with one drone was about to turn into the fight of my life. A fight that would drag in lawyers, news reporters, and eventually, half the country watching from their screens. Because Karen thought she could control us with fear. She had no idea we were about to make her famous for all the wrong reasons. The next week, the drone came back. This time, it was lower. Close enough that Duke leapt at it, barking furiously, his paws scraping the fence. Linda screamed at me to get inside, but I stood there, fists clenched, glaring at the little machine like I could burn it out of the sky with my stare. And again, it didn't leave right away. It circled, paused over my grill, dipped toward my garden beds. Then, just as my blood boiled over, it zipped back toward Karen Street. That night, I did something I hadn't done since my Army days. I surveilled the enemy. From the shadow of my garage, I watched Karen's yard. Her lights were always on late, blinds half drawn. And sure enough, right on her patio table sat the same drone, folded neatly like a loyal pet waiting for orders. Linda whispered at my shoulder. "We can't just let her do this. It's illegal, isn't it?" It had to be. But HOAs were tricky. They acted like governments but weren't. They thrived in the gray area between community standards and harassment. And Karen knew exactly how to exploit those lines. I wasn't going to beat her at her own game. Not by yelling, not by complaining to the board she controlled. No, I needed proof. So I bought my own camera system. Motion sensors. Audio recorders. If Karen wanted to treat this like a spy game, then I'd outspy her. And sure enough, within days, the pattern emerged. Every Saturday morning, every Sunday afternoon, like clockwork, the drone would lift off from her patio and cruise over backyards, mostly ours. I saved the footage, copied the files to 3 different drives. And when the 3rd violation notice came, this time accusing us of having improper patio furniture, I knew I had enough to start pushing back. But I wasn't ready yet. Not until I understood the full scope of her obsession. Because this wasn't about weeds or patio chairs. This was about control. And Karen wasn't going to stop until she broke us or until someone broke her. The funny thing about a neighborhood is that, on the surface, everything looks perfect. Trimmed lawns, polished cars, flags fluttering neatly on porches. But underneath, it's a pressure cooker. People smile at each other on the sidewalk, but behind those smiles are grudges, fears, and whispered frustrations. That became clearer the longer Karen's drones stalked our backyard. At first, I thought Linda and I were the only targets. She was president of the HOA. Maybe she'd just fixated on us as the new troublemakers. But the longer I paid attention, the more I noticed something odd. Whenever the drone wasn't hovering over our fence, it drifted across other houses too. One Sunday evening, as the sunset painted the sky orange, I spotted it floating over the Johnsons' place. They were quiet folks, late 60s, always kept their lawn neat as a pin. The drone hovered right over their back deck, where Mr. Johnson sat reading his paper in peace. He looked up, startled, and muttered something before going inside. The next day, wouldn't you know it, Karen was on his doorstep with a clipboard. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I saw her finger jabbing the air, saw him nodding reluctantly. Later that week, a brand new for sale sign appeared in their yard. Coincidence? Maybe. But I didn't believe in coincidences anymore. The longer I watched, the more houses the drone visited. It wasn't just me. Karen had been running her little airborne surveillance operation on half the neighborhood. Some folks were too timid to say anything. Others probably didn't even know they were being filmed. But I knew. And every time I caught that buzzing camera above us, I felt the walls of my home closing in. Linda couldn't sleep. She took to pulling the curtains tight, even during the day. Duke barked at shadows. And me? I was losing patience. Then came the night that changed everything. It was past midnight. The house was quiet. Linda asleep beside me. Duke snoring on the rug. I woke to a faint hum. That same mosquito whine. But closer, much closer. I crept to the window and froze. The drone was hovering not over the backyard this time, but directly outside our bedroom window. My blood ran cold. The little red light blinked, its lens angled straight at us, at my wife sleeping in her nightgown. That was the line. The final straw. I ripped open the window and shouted so loud the whole block probably heard me. "You sick freak! Get away from my house!" The drone tilted, almost as if startled, then zipped off into the night sky. Linda sat up, groggy and terrified. "What happened? What was it?" When I told her, she covered her mouth with both hands. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she whispered, "We're not safe here anymore." That was it. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just about HOA fines or petty rules. This was harassment, voyeurism, maybe even a crime. The next morning, I gathered every clip I had saved from my cameras. Hours of footage. Drones lifting off from Karen's patio, drones hovering above our backyard, drones peeking through windows. I had enough to bury her. But the trick was, how? Because Karen controlled the HOA. She controlled the narrative. She had friends in the city zoning office, on the code enforcement team. If I went to them first, she'd find a way to spin it back on me. No, I needed allies. And as it turned out, I wasn't the only one ready to fight back. It started with a quiet knock on my garage door. When I opened it, there stood my neighbor, Greg Miller. He lived 2 doors down, a middle-aged IT guy with kind eyes and a tired face. He glanced around nervously before stepping inside. "You've seen it too, right?" he asked. I didn't have to ask what he meant. "The drone," I said. He nodded. "She's been over my pool every weekend. My teenage daughter stopped swimming because she feels like she's being filmed." I clenched my jaw. I'd been angry before, but this made it personal. Within days, word spread. Quiet conversations at the mailbox, hushed exchanges on evening walks. Turns out, nearly everyone on our street had been targeted. Karen's drones weren't just harassment, they were domination. She used the footage as leverage, issuing fines, threatening reports, intimidating families into silence. That's when we held the first garage meeting. 7 neighbors crammed into my cluttered garage, sitting on lawn chairs and overturned buckets. Each had their own story. The Hensons were fined for improper landscaping after the drone captured their kids' toys left outside. The Parkers were threatened with eviction over a non-compliant patio awning that had stood for 10 years without issue. It wasn't just petty. It was systematic. "She's building a case against all of us," Greg said, pushing his glasses up. "And unless we stop her, she'll win." Linda looked at me, eyes burning with the same fire I felt. "Then we stop her." "But how?" We weren't lawyers. We weren't politicians. We were just ordinary people trying to live our lives. That's when Greg cleared his throat. "Actually, I might have an idea." He explained how data worked, how every drone recorded logs, GPS, flight paths, metadata. If we could somehow get hold of Karen's drone, we could prove without a doubt that she had been conducting illegal surveillance. It was risky, nearly impossible, but it was our best shot. And as I looked around that garage, at the tired, frustrated faces of my neighbors, I realized something important. Karen thought she could break us by isolating us, but instead, she had united us. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was a neighborhood rebellion. The plan was simple on paper, but dangerous in execution. We set bait. One Saturday, I dragged my grill to the middle of the yard, cranked up some country music, and pretended like I was throwing a backyard party. In reality, every neighbor from our garage meeting was positioned with cameras, binoculars, and cell phones ready. It didn't take long. The faint buzz came, right on cue. The drone hovered, dipped, circled, lower, lower, almost within reach. Duke went crazy, leaping against the fence, barking like a warhound. And then, just as planned, the drone swooped down, low enough to catch the action. That's when Greg launched the net gun. Yes, a net gun. The man had ordered it online, swearing it was for pest control. The net sailed through the air and tangled the propellers perfectly. The drone sputtered, whined, and crashed into the grass with a satisfying crunch. The whole yard erupted in cheers. We had it. The smoking gun. Greg was on it immediately, scooping it up like a soldier rescuing a wounded comrade. He pulled out a laptop, connected the wires, and started pulling the data. And what we saw, oh, it was worse than we ever imagined. Not just our yards, not just back decks or pools. The logs showed hundreds of hours of footage, dozens of homes, even private windows. Karen hadn't just been spying. She had been building a library of our private lives. And now, we had proof. The next morning, my garage looked more like a war room than a suburban tool shed. Laptops open, coffee mugs steaming, neighbors leaning forward like soldiers before a battle. We had the drone, the data, the footage, but none of us really knew what to do next. That's when Linda spoke the words that would change everything. "We need a lawyer." There was a pause. Nobody wanted to admit it, but she was right. Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor with too much time on her hands. She was a predator with power, hiding behind the HOA's authority. And if we wanted to win, we had to hit her where it hurt. Legally. Greg tapped his phone. "I know someone," Old college buddy. He does privacy law. By Tuesday evening, we were sitting in a quiet office downtown. The lawyer's name was Adam Patel, sharp suit, sharper mind. He listened carefully as we laid out the evidence, our videos, the drone itself, the flight logs Greg had extracted. When the last clip played, the one of the drone hovering outside my bedroom window, Adam leaned back slowly, his brow furrowed. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, turning to me, "what you have here isn't just harassment. This is a textbook case of invasion of privacy, potentially even stalking." Linda's hand squeezed mine. "Can we stop her?" I asked. Adam smiled thinly. "Oh, we can do more than stop her. We can bury her in lawsuits." Those words lit a fire in all of us. He explained the strategy. "We'd file a restraining order, gather sworn statements from every neighbor affected, and present the drone logs as irrefutable evidence. With enough pressure, Karen could not only lose her HOA position, but face serious legal consequences." But Adam had another idea too. "Cases like this, they attract attention. If you're willing, I could reach out to some reporters. Public exposure could make this move a lot faster." I glanced at Linda. She looked nervous, but then she nodded. "If it means stopping her, do it." We had no idea just how fast that public exposure would spin out of control. It started small. A local news van parked on our street. A reporter with too much hairspray asked me to describe what it felt like to have a drone watching my wife garden. I told her the truth, that it felt like living in a fishbowl, like we'd lost our dignity in our own home. That clip aired on the 6 o'clock news. By morning, it had been shared thousands of times online. By the next evening, a national network had picked it up. "Oh, a president accused of spying on neighbors with drones." That headline hit harder than any punch I'd ever taken. Suddenly, reporters were swarming Oakhaven, vans lined the street, cameras flashed every time Karen so much as stepped outside. And Karen? She hated it. I'll never forget the sight of her stomping down her driveway, pearls rattling on her neck, yelling at a cameraman to get off her lawn. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. This was the same woman who had filmed us without a second thought. But the best part? The footage from the drone, the hours of hovering above pools, peering into windows, went viral. People all across the country were horrified. Comments poured in. "Lock her up. This is terrifying. I'd sue too." Typical HOA Karen. She became an overnight villain, the kind of person the internet loves to hate. And for once, the power dynamic shifted. We weren't the ones hiding behind curtains anymore. She was. The lawsuit moved fast, faster than anyone expected. Adam filed on behalf of 7 families, myself included. We claimed invasion of privacy, harassment, and abuse of HOA power. Karen tried to fight back, of course. She hired her own lawyer, a smug man with slick hair who argued that the drones were for community safety, that she was monitoring for compliance. But the judge didn't buy it. When Greg played the footage of her drone hovering outside my bedroom window, the entire courtroom went silent. The judge's face hardened. "This," he said, "is not compliance monitoring. This is an egregious violation of privacy." Karen paled. For once, she had no words. By the end of the hearing, the restraining order was granted. The HOA board suspended her presidency indefinitely, and the case for damages was set to move forward. But for me, the sweetest moment wasn't the gavel strike. It was walking out of that courthouse, seeing the cameras waiting, and knowing the story was no longer mine alone. It belonged to everyone who'd ever been bullied by an HOA. Everyone who'd ever felt powerless against someone drunk on authority. We had turned Karen's obsession into her undoing. Over the next month, the story exploded online. Clips of the drone footage hit millions of views on TikTok, YouTube, Facebook. People memed her face onto Big Brother posters. News anchors debated the rise of HOA overreach. And me? I was just a retired construction foreman with a stubborn dog and a wife who wanted peace and quiet. Yet here I was, answering interview questions about digital privacy laws on national TV. The funniest part, the HOA itself nearly collapsed. Without Karen's iron fist, the board floundered. Members resigned. Neighbors who had been too scared to speak before suddenly found their voices. We started talking about dissolving the HOA entirely. For the first time in years, Oakhaven Estates felt like a community again, not a dictatorship. One evening, as I sat on my porch with Linda and Duke, watching the sunset without fear of buzzing wings above us, she asked quietly, "Do you regret it? Going public? Letting the whole world into our lives?" I thought about it. The stress, the cameras, the endless interviews. Then I shook my head. No. Because it wasn't just about us. It was about stopping her and every other HOA tyrant out there. We gave people hope. Linda smiled. And maybe a little entertainment, too. She wasn't wrong. The internet had dubbed me Drone Dad. And Linda, Rose Bush Mom. Duke even had his own fan page. But the real victory wasn't fame. It was freedom. No more violation notices, no more spying eyes, just peace. And as the cicadas hummed and the sky turned purple, I raised my glass to the quiet. Karen had tried to control us with drones, but in the end, she made us stronger, united, and she made herself infamous. Sometimes, justice doesn't just happen in a courtroom. Sometimes, it happens in the court of public opinion. And in that court, Karen lost. The strangest thing about storms is how quiet it feels when they're finally over. For months, Oak Haven Estates had been a battlefield. Drone buzzes, violation notices, garage meetings, court hearings, news vans. Then, just like that, it ended. The drones were gone. The notices stopped. Karen's pearl-clad shadow vanished from our block. I expected to feel triumphant, but at first it was just silence. No more waking at night to that faint mosquito whine. No more checking over my shoulder while mowing the lawn. Linda even laughed the first time she hung laundry outside again. "Feels like freedom," she said, stretching her arms toward the sky. She was right, but the quiet wasn't just relief, it was healing. Neighbors who barely spoke before were suddenly chatting over fences, swapping stories about Karen's tyranny like old war veterans telling tales of the front. Bonds formed, where fear used to sit. And me? I finally got to do the simplest thing I'd wanted all along, sit on my porch with a cold beer, Duke at my feet, and watch the sun sink behind the rooftops without a single interruption. Karen didn't disappear overnight, though. She tried to fight back. Oh, did she try? Filed countersuits, claimed she'd been defamed, even held a pathetic little press conference on her driveway. But the damage was already done. Every time she opened her mouth, reporters replayed the footage of her drones peeking into people's homes. The internet kept reminding her that she was the villain in a story too outrageous to forget. Her countersuit was thrown out with prejudice. Her reputation locally and nationally was shredded. People moved to Oak Haven and recognized her house instantly, whispering like they'd spotted a celebrity in hiding. Except she wasn't famous, she was infamous. Eventually, the HOA board forced her to resign permanently. Without her, the HOA itself crumbled. Meetings dwindled, enforcement slowed, until finally the community voted to dissolve the board altogether. Karen lost everything she'd built her petty empire on. And for the first time in decades, Oak Haven Estates belonged to its people, not its tyrant. A funny thing happens when you strip away fear, you get freedom. Real freedom. Families started grilling in their backyards again. Kids splashed in pools without glancing up at the sky. Curtains were opened. Laughter returned. We started hosting monthly potlucks on the Greenway, where once Karen's rulebook hung over us like a guillotine. Neighbors who'd barely known each other's names were now sharing recipes, lawnmowers, and life stories. And me? Somehow, I became the accidental leader of this new Oak Haven. People called me the man who stood up to the drones. I never saw myself that way. I was just a stubborn old foreman who wanted his peace. But if my fight gave others courage, then maybe it was worth every sleepless night. One evening, as Linda and I walked Duke along the quiet streets, she said softly, "You realize you changed more than just our neighborhood, right?" I chuckled. "How do you figure?" She squeezed my arm. "You showed people everywhere that you don't have to take it. That bullies, whether they're in an HOA or behind a drone, can be stopped." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, the lump in my throat too big for words. The internet never let go of our story. Clips of the courtroom, memes of Karen's scowl, even Duke barking at the drone, those videos circled the globe. Every few weeks, some new channel or TikTok account would revive it, and my phone would buzz with messages, "Hey, aren't you that guy from the drone story?" We became symbols, ordinary folks who fought back and won. At first, the attention was overwhelming. Reporters, podcasts, even a documentary crew that wanted to film the drone wars of Oak Haven. But over time, it softened into something else. A reminder. Proof that sometimes the little guy wins. And maybe that was the best revenge of all. Karen wanted control. She wanted power. But in the end, she handed us something far greater: unity, freedom, and a story that spread farther than her rules ever could. It was a year later when I finally realized the storm had truly passed. I was sitting on the porch, beer in hand, Duke snoring softly beside me, when I noticed the sky. Clear, quiet, not a single drone in sight. Linda came out with a plate of cookies, setting them down with that familiar smile. She leaned against me and sighed. Feels like home again. Home. That word carried more weight now than it ever had. Because a house is just wood and nails. A yard is just grass and fences. But a home? A home is where you feel safe. Where you can laugh, rest, and live without fear. And thanks to one HOA Karen who thought she could control the sky, we had fought harder than ever to reclaim ours. I looked at the porch light glowing softly above us and thought about everything we'd endured. The drones, the humiliation, the fight, the victory. And I realized something. In the end, it wasn't about revenge. It was about dignity. About ordinary people saying, enough. Karen spied on us with drones, tried to shame us with fines, tried to break us with fear. But she failed. Because you can't cage a community when it decides to stand together. And as I sat there, in the quiet hum of a summer evening, I smiled. The sky was ours again.